very good morning to you all, ladies and gentlemen. Day 2 of the second Indo-Pacific Economic Conclave. And it's good to be back. We did some very solid groundwork yesterday, and I'm sure you have all gone through the papers, but let me just still mention that the newspapers are abuzz with the news on the investments in West Bengal regarding the semiconductor fabrication unit under transformative collaboration with the United States. This was announced by the news about where we are with respect to this groundbreaking development was announced by Dr. Amit Mitra yesterday. And we also have in our midst the Consul General, the new Consul General of the United States in Kolkata, Consul General Kathy Giles Diaz in our midst, who's also in the papers today because of Twitter, because of her meeting with the Honorable Chief Minister yesterday. So probably we'll get snippets of that during her speech. In the meantime, just one announcement from my end. We are not having Dr. Anantha Nageswaran, Chief Economic Advisor to the Government of India, physically in our midst. You might be knowing today the Prime Minister himself has called for a meeting on the economy, and being the Chief Economic Advisor, he has to make a presentation. So yesterday, late afternoon, we got to know that he will be unable to come. He has cancelled all his meetings, but since he had confirmed to us way back, he will be joining us online around about 11:30, 12 around that time, and he has blocked some time for us exclusively for an online speech. So we shall start off our inaugural session of day 2 with a couple of announcements and couple of releases, very special from our end. First and foremost, it's been a labor of love, really, from our end. We have been working on publication from the Bengal Chamber of Commerce and Industry, and we wanted to make this a quarterly publication and an offering to you all. And the first edition of this is ready, and we didn't want it to be an economic, might I say boring business publication. We are a Chamber of Commerce, but I sometimes find business a little bit boring and tad tedious. But so it's going to be covering business, of course, but tourism, art, culture, history, and basically what India is to us. We are calling this the first edition, India That Is Bharat. And in this, we are honored to have pieces, articles penned by none other than Ustad Amjad Ali Khan on the soul of Bharat. He talks about music as a reflection of the Indian identity. Shift to the world of shifting power dynamics, again penned by Air Chief Marshal, retired, Arup Raha, on India's aerospace frontiers. Shri Sanjeev Sanyal, Prime Minister's Economic Advisory Council member, has written on India in the world economy. Professor Suranjan Das, Vice Chancellor, former Vice Chancellor of Calcutta University and Jadavpur University, rare feat, currently the Vice Chancellor of Adamas University, has talked about India's higher education odyssey. And we have also had pieces on climate by renowned journalist Jayanto Basu on Global Climate Summit. Our very own Mr. Gautam Ray, President, has written about the balance in India's energy policies and an inclusive energy growth and just climate transition at that. And in addition to all that, we have also had a piece by an IT expert on cognitive operations, a narrative in modern telcos and India's ICT evolution by Niladri Shekhar Dattu. So without further ado, we will release this book by the august panel on the dais and present it to you all. Can we please have the copy of the book? All of them. No. Thank you. The second announcement, yet another publication. We are very, as a Chamber of Commerce, we are extremely passionate about climate transition. And we have been talking about, how to mitigate climate change way back from 2008, when Kyoto was in its first assessment period. Even before the first assessment period started officially in 2008. Since then, sustainability is an abiding, focus area for us. And we have also constituted our own sustainability forum, which is a very high-powered committee of experts, bureaucrats, business leaders. The former Chief Secretary Government of West Bengal, Mr. Molay De, he is chairing it. Mentored by Mr. Partha Bhattacharya, former Chairman Coal India Limited. We have Dr. Meera Mitra, member governing body, Center for Responsible Business, a renowned CSR exponent. Mr. Ravindra Chamaria, who's a builder. He's group chairman, Infinity Infotech Parks, who are one of the largest builders of IT space in the city. We have Professor Runa Sarkar, Professor of Economics, IIM Calcutta. Mr. Shubhit Chakraborty, our immediate past president, seated in our midst. Mr. Sushil Kumar Suni, former founder and CEO POSOCO, which is now, Grid India. Mr. Shuthitha Bhattacharya, another former chairman, Coal India, and currently the chairman of Webble. And Mr. UK Bhattacharya, former director projects NTPC. So, of course, we have with us, as special invitee in group, Dr. Ajay Mathur, who's the Director General of the International Solar Alliance, which has been mandated and formed after the Paris, climate conference of parties. So we have one, copy of this publication. We call it a coffee table publication, but it's really something which will, get you thinking, and you would really want to pick it up. We did it kind of at express speed, so we have got one of the copies ready. We would like to unveil it by our president, and we shall soon have more copies ready and shall distribute the same amongst you and advertise about it in our social media handles. Can we have a copy for the president, please? We are calling it Sustainability Decoded. And the authors are Mr. Jayanto Basu, Mr. Alok Mukherjee, former president, Mr. P.S. Bhattacharya, Professor Runa Sarkar, Mr. Ravindra Chamaria, Mr. S.K. Suni, all part of the Sustainability Forum, Mr. Shubhit Chakraborty, Mr. Sudeep Nag, Mr. Deepak Gupta of GAIL, and Mr. UK Bhattacharya, formerly NTPC. So there you go. We shall move straight to the opening address by the President of the Bengal Chamber, Mr. Gautam Ray, for the inaugural session on day 2 of our Indo-Pacific Economic Conclave. Sir.
Good morning to all of you and welcome to the second day of our very flagship event, the Indo-Pacific Economic Conclave. It is the second edition of which we are holding today. Shubhadeep has already mentioned about the sudden meeting by the Prime Minister, for which our Dr. V. Ananth Nageshwaran could not be here physically, but as because he has committed, so he will be online at a convenient time, of course within this session. We are really glad to have the gracious presence of Mrs. Cathay Dias, Consul General US. He has only probably a month or so in the city of Kolkata. Welcome you, ma'am, especially to the city of Kolkata. Mrs. Mikiko Tanaka, Director and Head, South and Southwest Asia Office, United Nations Economic and Social Commission for Asia and Pacific. She was there with us yesterday also. Thank you, ma'am. Our own Mr. Arnab Basu, the President-designate, Chairperson, IT Committee, Advisory Leader, PwC, and just waiting for 1 or 2 hours to come, he will take over as President. Yesterday, it was really very enriching deliberation. Dr. Mitra, he has explained, the Principal Chief Advisor to the Honorable Chief Minister of West Bengal. He has not only explained and given the data and the statistics that how really the state is progressing, what all the investments really is happening on the ground, including the Bengal Silicon Valley, then large-scale data centers. But one very important thing he has told that it is not a sporadic cases. It is behind it, there are building blocks, there are definite policies, and these are outcome of some definite policies which has a priority, which has a focus. We are very, very optimistic, and we want to see a very good result to come in near future. We were also enriched with the deliberation of Consul General of Japan and Australia yesterday here. Now, one of the IT topic what was discussed yesterday, how to really strengthen and formalize our initiative on Association of India-Pacific Chamber of Commerces, AIPCC, which has started the journey in the last Indo-Pacific Economic Conclave held last year. We had couple of meetings in between. And yesterday, as I understand, Shubhadeep, if I am not wrong, that the responsibility was entrusted to us ultimately. There was a presence from Vietnam. There were presence online from Malaysia. I had a meeting in Bangkok where Bangladesh was also there. And more or less by this couple of meetings, it has been clear that they want this body to be registered in India, and our chamber has been entrusted to take it forward. So definitely another task for the new president and the DG and the committee, and definitely I can see lot of hope and prospect in this initiative. One thing we missed yesterday is the specific discussion on startups, because whenever we talk about technology, whenever we talk about electronics, IoT, AI, startups are playing a major role here. So India has almost 1.14 lakh recognized startups. Out of that, 113 are the unicorns, and India has emerged as a global leader in this initiative. The issue Professor Rai Chaudhary was deliberating yesterday, I was listening. The issue what is coming up is that the standardization. Not the standardization of the startups, but the standardization of the seamless trade payments, digital transformation in payments. These are some of the interactions. These are some of the issues which will definitely come up. There are government initiatives like Atal Innovation Mission, provides e-platform for creative ideas flourishing, creating jobs and fostering economic growth. India is one of the pioneers. In fact, it has reached to millions and millions of people within the country, abroad, on the unified payment system, RuPay. And I should mention here the recent initiative of central bank digital currency and RBI's introduction of digital rupee. Definitely these are very, very forward-looking and placing India in a different plane altogether in the trade and commerce. There are some innovations also continuously happening. In fact, more than 1100 R&D centers from global giants like IBM, Google, Microsoft, they are operating in this country. Only point I can add from my side that it requires also a strong handholding with manufacturing. Engineering innovation is also important, and that has to be given more and more importance, and particularly in a state where we have seen, Dr. Mitra also yesterday he was mentioning, that a very, very strong presence of MSME. And we know that what exactly they require. They require such standardizations. They require such gateways to really reach to the outer world. So the state probably first or second in number, that's not the question, but there is a very, very strong presence of MSME in the state, and we should have some innovation, engineering solutions and manufacturing innovations which will help SMEs to grow further. So keeping that in mind, we have chosen the topic as strengthening Indo-Pacific partnership through technology collaboration. Indo-Pacific we discussed, technology we discussed, we will be discussing, but the collaboration in today's world probably the most significant and important word. We all know we have differences, we all know we have different priorities, different set of interest, different level of development. Equity is a question which has to be definitely looked into, but ultimately the collaboration among the countries, among the group of countries are probably showing the pathway today to bring a convergence to ultimately meet the objective of sustainability. If we do not sustain, there is no issue of such discussions on development, whatever may be. So with this, keeping this in mind, and thank you Shubhadeep and the team for making these publications ready, and I welcome you all again, and I believe that today's morning discussion will be very, very fruitful, and I am very confident that we will be able to place ourselves in a important positions and a functional position, and a position where not only the chamber, but it will help the progress of the country and the state also. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. You have so very comprehensively set the tone for today's deliberations. May I now request Consul General Kathy Giles Diaz of the United States to please set the ball rolling with her address. This is probably her first, public engagement in Kolkata after taking over, in a business, chamber, of course. She has been with the US mission in NATO in Brussels. She has worked extensively in Japan, Belgium, El Salvador, Washington, D.C., and she has also, in fact, in one of my previous interactions with her, she was mentioning that she has spent considerable time in Japan as well in her youth, and she brings to the table the last member of the Quad whom we missed yesterday. So over to you, ma'am.
Thank you. To the distinguished panelists, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. I am delighted to be here with you today at the Indo-Pacific Economic Conclave. I thank the Bengal Chamber for inviting me, and indeed one of my first speeches, and for being valued partners of the U.S. Consulate. I arrived, as was noted, just over a month ago, and I'm excited to work with all of you to build upon the strong foundation of friendship and cooperation that I know already exists between our countries and between our organizations. As the most dynamic and fastest growing region on Earth, the Indo-Pacific is an essential driver of America's future security and prosperity. The region is home to more than half the world's population and accounts for 60% of the global GDP, as well as 2/3 of global economic growth. It's truly an economic powerhouse. So today I wanted to talk a little bit about the framework that our work with the government of India, both in multilateral context, but also in the bilateral context, the frameworks we are setting up and working on that is helping drive forward our work in the Indo-Pacific. Since the release of the Biden administration's Indo-Pacific strategy in February 2022, we have strengthened our relationship with allies and partners to advance our common vision for the Indo-Pacific region that is free and open, connected, prosperous, resilient, and secure. Also important to what we do. To put this into practice, one area that I would highlight is the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework for Prosperity, which is also known as IPEF. This organization, or this partnership, which combined markets of 14 IPEF countries, which included India, Australia, Japan, the United States, and others, represents nearly 40% of the world's gross domestic product, presenting significant opportunities for collaboration and economic growth. IPEF focuses on forging innovative partnerships across distinct pillars. There's 4 different pillars, which include trade, supply chains, clean economy, and fair economy. I wanted to spend a little bit more time on some recent IPEF achievements in 2 of these areas, supply chains and clean economy. Related to supply chains, we signed the IPEF Supply Chain Agreement in February of this year. Through this agreement, IPEF partners are intensifying cooperation on a range of specific areas, including cybersecurity, best practices in cargo risk assessment, data-driven approaches to supply chain vulnerability, labor and workforce development, and tabletop exercises simulating supply chain disruption. So all really practical work that we're doing to help make us all safer. Under the IPEF Clean Economy Agreement, IPEF partners continue to deepen cooperation to accelerate the transition to clean economies. During the IPEF Ministerial in Singapore, just a few months ago in June, ministers and government agencies, along with investors and innovative project proponents from across the region, gathered to launch the inaugural Clean Energy Investor Forum for IPEF. This allows them to exchange market insights, explore business opportunities, and establish a pipeline of investment opportunities. This first-of-a-kind forum resulted in $23 billion in investment opportunities for sustainable infrastructure and climate technology projects in the Indo-Pacific. During the forum, the partners and the Private Infrastructure Development Group also announced the operational launch of the IPEF Catalytic Capital Fund, which deploys concessional funding, technical assistance, and capacity building support to expand the pipeline of quality, resilient, and inclusive clean economy infrastructure projects. Again, really important developments. IPEF clearly has achieved a lot, but it is not the only forum for our work together in the Indo-Pacific. I'm sure many of you have closely followed the Quad Leaders Summit, which happened last week in Delaware. As Indo-Pacific countries, our Quad partners, Australia, India, Japan, and the United States, are deeply invested in the region's success. Through the Quad, we are supporting the region through practical cooperation on challenges and topics as diverse as maritime security, critical and emerging technologies and cybersecurity, to humanitarian assistance, disaster relief, health security, and climate change. We're working on many, many areas. I'd like to highlight a couple different areas and new announcements were made following the September 21st summit, which just draw your attention to those. Under the Health Security Partnership, the Quad launched the historic Quad Cancer Moonshot, which is a groundbreaking effort to leverage public and private resources to reduce the number of lives lost to cancer in the Indo-Pacific, with an initial focus on cervical cancer, a largely preventable disease that continues to be a major health crisis in the region. To bolster maritime security, another important area, the Quad announced a new regional maritime initiative for training in the Indo-Pacific, or MITRE, to enable our partners to maximize tools to monitor and secure their waters, enforce their laws, and deter unlawful behavior. The Quad also launched the Indo-Pacific Logistics Network pilot project, which will enhance our shared airlift capacity among the four nations and leverage collective logistic strengths to support civilian response to natural disasters more rapidly and efficiently across the region. And in support of our next generation, we launched the Quad Fellowship. This new initiative will award 50 Quad scholarships worth $500,000 to students from the Indo-Pacific to pursue a 4-year undergraduate engineering program at a Government of India funded technical institution. So really good to see that. Now, working together through multilateral formats is critical to our work in the Indo-Pacific, and clearly there is a lot going on, but I would be remiss if I didn't talk about our bilateral relationship between the US and India. On September 21st, as I think you all know, President Biden met with Prime Minister Modi and affirmed the US-India Comprehensive Global and Strategic Partnership, which we see as one of the defining partnerships of the 21st century, which it will deliver on an ambitious agenda to serve the global good. I would encourage you to read the joint fact statement that was released about the partnership earlier this week. There is a lot there, many, many announcements, and has a lot of details about the multifaceted and truly comprehensive partnership. Technology innovation is an important aspect of that. So with that in mind, I will call your attention to several of the initiatives. I know certainly the semiconductor announcement has gotten a lot of attention, but there's a lot else to unpack in that announcement. So a couple things to highlight. The leaders welcomed the US-India roadmap to build safe and secure global clean energy supply chains. In its initial phase, the US and India will work together to unlock $1 billion worth of multilateral financing to support projects for renewable energy, energy storage, power grid and transmissions technology, high-efficiency cooling systems, and zero-emission vehicles. President Biden and Prime Minister Modi also highlighted the success of the Initiative on Critical and Emerging Technologies, what we call ICET, in deepening and expanding our strategic cooperation across key technology sectors, including space, semiconductors, and advanced telecommunication. Both leaders committed to enhance regular engagements to improve the momentum of collaborations in fields such as AI, quantum biotechnology, and clean energy. And obviously, I think what many of us are watching and really caught many of our eyes closer to home here in Kolkata, they announced, of course, the Global Foundries creation of the GF Kolkata Power Center. I think this is something we're all very excited about. It's good for the region. It will bring jobs, but it will also help build and ensure resilient, secure, and sustainable semiconductor supply chains. So this is all really important work and I think really good to see. The US-India partnership is both deep and wide. The United States is committed to continuing to expanding how we and India can translate our values and our dreams into a much more peaceful, secure, and prosperous future for all peoples. This vision is based on the fundamental fact that the United States and India are better off together, and we produce better results together when we work on peace, prosperity, planet, and for our people. That all begins with you. You help translate all of this work. You help put it into practice, and you help make it happen. So I thank you, all of you, for all the work that you do. I thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak, and I look forward to working with you in the years ahead. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Constable. In fact, you spoke about the practicality and the groundwork that is being done through these trade partnerships. And interestingly, IPEF, the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework, which started off with basically focusing on fair economy, supply chain, management issues, clean economy, is also now blossoming into, sort of a trade deal or trade-related discussions where probably at some point tariffs will also come in. You spoke about, and I took copious notes of that, about the joint statement. In fact, I'll go through it. It has been released this week. It will probably give us a lot of pointers as a Chamber of Commerce to focus our own activities in this region, especially because, as the President mentioned, we have started collaborating with other chambers in the region to bring about cohesiveness in business strategy and the business ecosystem. The President spoke about the standardization issues with respect to digital transformation in payments. He spoke about manufacturing and the need for MSMEs being sort of part of the larger value chain in this region. And of course, one very, very sort of passionate focus area for him has been sustainability, which brings me to the next speaker for today's inaugural session, Ms. Mikiko Tanaka, Director and Head, South and Southwest Asia Office, United Nations Economic and Social Commission for Asia and the Pacific. Madam Tanaka has been working in a lot of projects. She has worked in rural development. She has been working in Guyana. She has worked in Thailand. She has worked in Timor, Pakistan, Benin, Lao PDR, Yemen. And yesterday we were having a discussion on the sidelines. We do look forward to working with UNESCAP going forward, wherever we can add value, especially in the area of manufacturing and MSME integration, and also in the area of entrepreneurship development at the grassroots. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you very much. Mr. Gautam Ray, current president, and Mr. Arnab Basu, president-designate of the Bengal Chamber of Commerce and Industries, Ms. Kathy Giles Diaz, U.S. Consulate General of Kolkata, nice to meet you, and Mr. Shubhodip Ghosh, the Director General of BCCNI. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm really honored to speak to this distinguished group of business leaders again from last year on behalf of the UN Economic and Social Commission for Asia and the Pacific. World leaders have gathered this week in New York in a very sober, actually, UN General Assembly meeting. The UN Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, opened by saying, "Our world is in a whirlwind. We are in an era of epic transformation, facing challenges unlike any we have ever seen, challenges that demand global solutions." At the Summit of the Future, member states adopted the Pact for the Future after long and very hard negotiations and diplomacy. The pact outlines what governments and people around the world need to do to protect the needs and interests of present and future generations across the three pillars of the United Nations: sustainable development, peace and security, and human rights. There is a whole section in this pact on science, technology, and innovation, and digital cooperation that is pertinent to the theme of this conclave. So I'd like to cite a few points from that pact. Digital and emerging technologies, including artificial intelligence, plays a significant role as enablers of sustainable development and are dramatically changing our world. They offer huge potential for progress for the benefit of people and planet today and in the future. Innovations and scientific breakthrough that can make our planet more sustainable and our countries more prosperous and resilient should be affordable and accessible to all. Billions of people, especially in developing countries, do not have meaningful access to critical life-changing technologies. If we are to make good on our promise to leave no one behind, sharing science, technology, and innovation is essential. We must responsibly manage the potential risks posed by science and technology, in particular, the ways in which science, technology, and innovation can perpetuate and deepen divides, in particular the gender gap and patterns of discrimination and inequality within and between countries, and adversely impact the enjoyment of human rights and progress on sustainable development. At ESCAP's Asia-Pacific Ministerial Conference on Digital Inclusion and Transformation earlier this month, it was emphasized that comprehensive digital transformation was essential. A comprehensive digital transformation not only involves technological advancement, but also the creation of an inclusive digital society that addresses the needs of all segments of the population. To bridge the digital divide and foster inclusive growth, it is essential to ensure that access to technologies and capacity building efforts are available to everyone. The contributions and role of the private sector are essential in this regard. Ladies and gentlemen, in recent years, we have witnessed the surge in innovations aimed at tackling one of the greatest challenges and dilemmas of our time, climate change. The Asia-Pacific region is highly vulnerable to climate-related disasters, while as a whole contributing over half of the world's total greenhouse gas emissions. Ironically, developing and small island countries with the lowest carbon footprints are among the hardest hit by the impacts of climate change. The dilemma continues. Rapidly rising electricity demands for digital devices increase carbon emissions. At the same time, smart technologies are reducing carbon footprints in sectors like transportation, energy, and agriculture. Informed and balanced management of technology will be an important factor in business contributions to sustainable and equitable development. Let me share a business example from the Indo-Pacific of innovative technology transforming digital preparedness. Let me see if I can, okay. Highly vulnerable to climate-induced disasters, the Philippines faces challenges in delivering early warning systems to all citizens, especially those without smartphones. Comunidad, a local company, is tackling this through its AI-powered solutions. Their Curbeat platform, which I've projected there, integrates data from sensors, Earth observations, and local communities to provide life-saving warnings. Users can track loved ones in high-risk areas and connect instantly to emergency services, which is crucial in a country without a centralized emergency number. Curbeat stands out in reaching users with basic phones via SMS, ensuring even remote communities are alerted. Community leaders can upload local information to expand its reach. By using AI to distribute warnings in local languages and post alerts on Facebook, Curbeat ensures no one is left behind. Ladies and gentlemen, let's think further how opportunities created by technology can be more equally distributed. According to the World Bank, in 2022, nearly 500 million people in South Asia, East Asia, and the Pacific were still living below the $2.15 per day poverty line. We continue to face a persistent digital divide. In South Asia alone, only 43% of the population had access to the internet in 2021. In the same year, internet access was 65% in the Pacific and 73% in East Asia, which includes Southeast Asia, by the way. Businesses can innovate both high-tech and low-tech to help people cross over the digital divide and get out and stay out of poverty. Regional cooperation can expand technology to people and communities across countries. Copernic in Indonesia is an inspiring research and development lab that has been developing technology to address socioeconomic and environmental challenges. Copernic's approach to technology is really to understand the real pressing needs of marginalized communities and to develop the right tools to meet those needs. They found 3 basic requisites for technology that is useful for people on the margins of development and economic prosperity. Technology has to be simple to use, it has to be affordable, and it has to be easy to maintain and fix. Sustainable development progress is often hindered by fundamental challenges in developing countries, such as lack of access to electricity or clean water. However, this is precisely where technology can bridge the gap and enable transformative solutions. In 2011, this is a while ago, Copernic worked with Drip Tech India to help transfer a low-cost drip irrigation technology developed with Stanford University to small farm holders in Kechla in Odisha. The success of technology innovation in reaching underserved communities does not happen in isolation. Even with the best of intentions, capacities, and resources, multinational corporations from developed countries and businesses in developing countries based in big cities do not understand the nuances of the environment and needs of people living in remote and socially or economically marginalized communities. This disconnect is a hindrance to inclusive markets of essential technology that people from all walks of life can access and afford. It requires cooperation across sectors, particularly among public, private, and research sectors, and effective connections with communities through MSMEs, nonprofit organizations, local governments, or community networks. Chambers of Commerce and Industry have a potential role to play in creating inclusive technology cooperation and business models. They can act as facilitators, connecting innovators with communities and producers in production value chains, or connecting larger businesses with MSMEs that are within or closer to these communities. Ladies and gentlemen, innovation is crucial, but it is cooperation that holds the key to scaling technological solutions and making them accessible to everyone. In the Asia-Pacific region, momentum is building up behind digital cooperation efforts. ESCAP's Asia-Pacific Information Superhighway Initiative is dedicated to closing the digital divide and accelerating digital transformation through regionally coordinated actions promoting digital technology and applications, digital connectivity, and the use of digital data. The Asia-Pacific Center for Transfer of Technology, or APCTT, is an ESCAP regional institution based in New Delhi and has been fostering partnerships between governments, research and development institutions, private sector, and civil society for transfer, dissemination, and diffusion of environmentally sound technologies among countries in Asia-Pacific. The Bengal Chamber of Commerce and Industry and IPCC may consider facilitating cross-border business cooperation by creating B2B platforms to connect and scale technologies across the Indo-Pacific region. And it would be great if we can explore from ESCAP collaboration towards that objective. So ladies and gentlemen, as we look ahead, there is no doubt that technology will continue playing a pivotal role in driving the future and economic progress. While the challenges we face are significant and somewhat unknown, technology combined with humanity is the way to sustainable and equitable transformation. Together, by encouraging businesses to adopt sustainable practices and fostering regional cooperation, I am hopeful that innovation and inclusivity go hand in hand. Let me just close before closing. Actually, show a few more photos. I was searching in the internet. What the innovations that help the poor that are really successful in the world today? And I found this social media site called Mashable that did last year, 2023, the 16 most brilliant pro-poor innovations. I just want to share a few photos just to give you a sense. I thought it was really exciting to see this. So this first one is the shoe that grows. And this is a collaboration between a US nonprofit with, I think it was a Kenyan entrepreneurs. Let me just show you. So this is for, children grow and their feet grow, and you don't have to basically buy shoes every year. Thought this was really cool. It's selling very well. It's on Amazon. Okay. This one is from India. Again, US nonprofit with an Indian medical institution collaboration, the life-saving dot. So this one has iodine in this. So women can put iodine here, like the traditional bindi, and that would provide iodine every day. Another one, oops, sorry. Right, a few more. So the safari seat, this is also from Kenya. All road, very rough, rural terrain. So persons with disabilities can use this wheelchair relatively comfortably. The eco cooler, this is from Bangladesh, using plastic bottles, actually. And then this lucky ironfish, this is also on Amazon, but this is from, I think it's South Africa. I'm getting mixed up. It was Africa, anyway. But there's iron deficiency, right? So this fish has iron, so when you put this fish in the pot while you're cooking, it actually adds iron. And then the Wonder Bag, this I think was South Africa. Basically, you cook, boil, in a pot, and then you put it in this Wonder Bag, and then without heat, for 8 hours, it keeps that temperature, so it can slow cook. So anyway, these are really exciting innovations, and there's a lot in India and Indo-Pacific too, but basically how to connect people to actually make this work and accessible to the people who need it, this is really the key. And I hope, I'm sure there are examples already, but I hope that could also expand and really, if we can find a way to collaborate, that would be great. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Ms. Tanaka. That was fabulous. Yes, we are, in fact, into a lot of grassroots projects ourselves on skills and on nursery development, on agriculture. We are working with FPOs. We have had a discussion yesterday, and we are really looking forward to working with SCAP and your team going forward. Ladies and gentlemen, we started off this session with a focus on strategy, how important supply chain issues become in strategy dialogues, moving over to trade, getting into economic partnerships. Obviously, because we're in Kolkata and in Bengal, the impending investment that has been announced is very exciting for all of us. And then, we moved on to the grassroots. How does it all work? How does it actually impact people on the ground? And people who have little or no access to technology, how do you, make it available and accessible to them? And probably that's the role that as a Chamber of Commerce we should be playing, and we aspire to play, and we are trying to play. We shall move on to the next session, which will talk about more on as again the President has talked about it, fintech innovation and standardization for seamless trade and payments in the Indo-Pacific. There are some very, very exciting speakers in that session. And of course, in a few minutes time, we'll have the CEA join us at 11:30 sharp, he said. So may I now request Mr. Arno Basu, President Designate of the Bengal Chamber and Chairperson, IT Committee of the Bengal Chamber of Commerce and Industry, to please not deliver the closing remarks, but looking forward. Arno.
Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. It's indeed a pleasure and a privilege to be here and talking to all of you. As you saw, the question paper is being changed at the last moment, so I'll try and do justice to what he asks me to look at. We have had quite a few deliberations yesterday and today, but I did want to touch upon a few things which I felt is very important to looking ahead, as Shubhadeep mentioned. When we look at the Indo-Pacific, I think we heard about IPEF and the focus that IPEF has on trade, supply chain, clean economy, fair economy, all that is understood. But I think somewhere sitting in India, it becomes very important to understand all of them in the context of the quality of life. The quality of life of an average Indian, that should probably be the center piece of what we are trying to do everything around. And sometimes in our focus on trade, we sometimes tend to overlook that. And I'm actually very, very hopeful with what we heard also from our distinguished guests on the dais, that I think India is taking a leading position in ensuring that many of the work which we are doing in the Indo-Pacific, and of course US as one of the largest economies in the world obviously has a very large role to play in it, and India being probably the most populous country in the world probably would also have a very large role to play in it, that we are working towards a future where we are looking at not just tech for the sake of tech. We keep hearing about this tech partnership for the future in the semiconductor space, but it's not just about a semicon fabrication unit which is focused on advanced sensing, around communication, around power electronics. Yes, we will have that. But I think the Indo-Pacific has a role to play, as I was speaking yesterday also, on ensuring that we have a resilient supply chain for semicon manufacturing, not only for the Indo-Pacific but for the world. You cannot have a semicon supply chain without the Indo-Pacific. If you cannot think of semiconductors, you can't think of semiconductors today beyond, not just US, but South Korea, Japan, Taiwan. And of course, if you have to think of how semicons have become part and parcel of everything that we do, it is something which will probably have a huge role to play. And the GF Kolkata Power Center would have a very significant role to play going in. I think the other innovation areas where we have been focused on, and again, the Indo-Pacific has a role to play, primarily around zero and low emission products. Now, when we think of connected cars, connected ecosystems, Industry 4.0, artificial intelligence covering everything, this entire data implosion, which is, explosion which is going to happen, that cannot happen without innovation towards clean fuel, innovation towards clean cooling systems. It is very difficult to think of today, how you would handle a data center. It's not just about the power, it's about how you cool it. And today climate change is staring us at our face. We know what happened in Vietnam a few weeks back, right? And that's becoming a trend which is continuing to impact us. When we look at automated supply chains, when we look at R&D, I want to say, we heard about from Kathy around the biotech piece. Now, on the biotech piece, the advancements are not just in, the way we understand biotech. There are advancements which are being thought of in synthetic biology. There are advancements being thought of in computational biology, which are only possible with the current kind of tech infrastructure which you have. If you are looking at gene mapping and genome biology, it is very difficult to do it without the current kind of technology infrastructure that we have. But it's not just about biology when it comes to biotech. When you go to biomanufacturing, and we were hearing from the president that there has to be a fair amount of push on advanced material science and advanced material R&D, which will allow you to get into biomanufacturing. Without that, you can't get into biomanufacturing. The other thing which we touched upon yesterday and also today is this entire cyber cooperation framework. And if you think of the cyber cooperation framework, it is very quickly becoming a very sectoral construct. It is becoming a very sectoral construct because when you're looking at threat info being shared, when you're looking at vulnerability information being shared and plugged, it is sectoral. When you look at our energy security, when you look at our communication security, cyber cooperation framework within the Indo-Pacific again becomes very, very critical. And the last but not the least, I would probably say in this, is this entire clean energy supply chain, which is again something I touched upon. If you look at it, whether you're looking at agri-tech, whether you're looking at biotech, all of these would need a clean energy supply chain system. The other one, which I'm sure, in West Bengal it becomes even more critical, is how are we looking at MSMEs and what we are doing within the Indo-Pacific or with the Indo-Pacific in mind to ensure that their trade and export finances are available. They're being able to participate in the digital trade ecosystem that we currently have, and they're partly, protected when they're part of that entire agri ecosystem, because a large part of our country is dependent on agriculture. And when we look at, credit availability, when we look at insurance, when we look at crop protection, each of these have a very deep technology underpinning which we have to think of. So in that perspective, I think I'm very hopeful of what we are currently being focused on, both as a country and as a state, but also as a chamber. It's our initiative to be at the forefront of some of these discussions. We understand the role which we have to play in bringing together different parts of the ecosystem to a better India, not just for the corporate India, but a better India for the average Indian. So that's my look forward towards the future. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much, Arnab. Coming from you as my new boss for the year. So we think that the one major focus will be on how do we impact positively the quality of life of our fellow Indians. And of course, we do have committees, etc., on biotech. We have a very, very busy IT committee, IT entrepreneurs network as well, and of course our sustainability forum and energy, environment, and water committees, which will continue focusing on the clean energy and the related issues on zero and low emission products. With that, we close this session, but before we do that and move over to the address by the CEA, Dr. Ananth Nageshwaran, we would request the President of the Bengal Chamber to please present tokens of our deep appreciation to both the speakers on the dais, starting with Consul General Kathy Giles Diaz. And to Ms. Mikiko Tanaka. Thank you very much. I think our team is setting up his in, May I request Professor Dr. Ajita Barai Chaudhary, Chairperson of our Economic Affairs Committee, to please take this session forward, starting with the CEA's address. The last session was very interesting. Now we are just waiting to have the keynote address by our chief guest, Dr. V. Anantha Nageswaran. He is the Chief Economic Advisor, Government of India. And we heard him in the last Indo-Pacific Conclave. Very interesting speaker, very knowledgeable too. So we are all eagerly waiting to hear on, at least its topic is Innovation and Entrepreneurship, Catalyzing Indo-Pacific Growth. So I guess Dr. Nageswaran is there. So welcome, Dr. Nageswaran. Very good morning from us. And so, is he there? Oh, hello. So it's all up to you, Dr. Nageswaran. We are all waiting for your very interesting deliberations.
Thank you very much for your kind words, and I hope all of you can hear me well. So let me share screen here, and I hope you can see the full screen, I hope. So good morning, everybody, and I convey my apologies to all of you and also to the Bengal Chamber of Commerce and Industry, the distinguished office bearers, for not being able to come in person, which was the original intent. However, I think I would do my best to let you not feel the absence of my physical presence there. While it is somewhat difficult for me to speak about the Indo-Pacific per se, and given that there is Indo as part of the Indo-Pacific, let me share my thoughts on where Indian economy is heading, because Indo-Pacific is a very wide geographical term, and it consists of both advanced and developing economies, or somewhere economies in the middle as well. So without much further ado, I think what we need to realize, and of course some of this may not be necessarily evident if you look at the global boom in stocks and stock markets at the moment, but I think the world is still facing considerable medium uncertainties, medium term. If you look at this chart here, on the left side, you can see that global trade volume growth has been trending down. I think you don't see it very well because of the big spikes and contractions around 2008 and 2020. But otherwise, what you see is, if you look closely, the average growth rates have been trending down. And the same thing can be said with respect to global industrial production volume as well. So effectively, I think because global manufacturing shifted east, and in the case of US, probably somewhat partially to Mexico as well, thanks to NAFTA agreement. I think by and large, and today what we witness in the deindustrialization to some extent, as is being called even by Germans themselves, the deindustrialization or the shift of manufacturing out of Germany, because it is very difficult to imagine that Volkswagen would be contemplating shutting down one of its factories of all places in Wolfsburg in Germany, because Volkswagen, Wolfsburg and Germany were all synonymous with one another in terms of they symbolize the rise of Germany as a global manufacturing power. So things are indeed changing underneath what we see as the buoyancy in financial markets. And global trade restrictions have also risen over the last several years, and many reasons are being advanced: climate change, geopolitical concerns, and more importantly, strategic competitiveness. I think the strategic cooperation has always coexisted with strategic competitiveness, but the balance keeps shifting. while the last 20, 30 years from 1980 onwards until about 2015, it was more strategic cooperation and less strategic competitiveness. Now it is more of the latter, competitiveness vis-a-vis cooperation. That is also going to raise the cost of manufacturing because inventories have to be maintained much more than what they used to be, because just in time cannot be taken for granted anymore. It is now just in case, because supply chain security, some amount of margin of safety and slack are required, partly because of the sea lanes and passages are no longer safe and secure, but also because nations themselves do not necessarily feel that much more cooperative, but more competitive in terms of their attitude towards each other. So all these factors are, I think, are realities, and they are different from the kind of reality that we got used to in the 35 years between 1980 and 2015, by and large. So the world is indeed changing quite dramatically, and these kind of cycles are not new. The world has gone through these cycles because if you remember, the world's best period of globalization was between 1885 and 1914, and just thereafter, World War I happened, and then came the boom in Europe, US, and hyperinflation in Europe, particularly in Germany, and then we had the 1930s depression, and then on and off recovery resulting in World War II, etc. So there was a long period of strife, and then post-World War II recovery, countries were still largely segmented and not integrated. Financial markets, global trade were all segmented. There were two clear camps, the Allied forces and then the Soviet Union, etc., behind the Iron Curtain. So it took a long time for globalization to come back in the 1980s. So what we left behind in 1914 came back in 1980 after about 6.5 decades. So I think we could be at the beginning of one such cusp of a new phase, which is different from what we got used to, a phase of global integration in the last, in the 35 years between 1980 and 2015. So putting the global context aside, which is now marked by uncertainties, competition, trade restrictions, active industrial policies, etc., for India, I think more importantly, the post-COVID recovery is well and truly cemented. We have 8.2% in FY24, and before that we had 7%, and before that we had 9.7%. So I think one of the reasons why I think India has been able to do much better compared to itself and compared to other countries is that the COVID management was a very good one, and that is not very widely appreciated. Both with respect to the management of the health fallout and the economic fallout. The government of India did a good job, and the calibrated and prudent fiscal and monetary stimulus, which were also withdrawn in time, have given the economy macro stability. And it is the stability that provided the foundation for economic growth and the capital markets performance over the last 4 years. So in some sense, I think it's very important to recognize that stability is not at the expense of growth, but stability provides the foundation for economic growth, which in turn has also propelled corporate earnings and therefore the capital markets performance. On the right side, I think what you see is that consumption growth has remained very stable. But more importantly, gratifyingly, we have capital formation picking up from 27.3% in FY21 to 30.8%, which is an improvement, because second decade capital formation came down because private sector and the real estate sector were not growing. They were undergoing balance sheet adjustments. Exports picked up post-COVID, 18.7% improved to 21.4%. But as I mentioned earlier, export growth is going to be challenging, given that the global trade volumes are not rising, and global growth may likely also be on the lower side compared to what we experienced back in the first decade. India, I think, is a snapshot of some of the important indicators. On the external front, I think, if you look at the current account balance, the dollar liabilities, etc., India is not facing any vulnerabilities because India's foreign currency debt is quite low. And then on the right side, you also see domestic financial markets or the banking system is much healthier now compared to last decade. Corporates are also in good shape. So there is lending activity, which is growing very well. India had a negative credit gap, which means actual credit growth was below the trend growth last decade, but now that gap is closing. So there is a healthy credit growth. And quality of the fiscal expenditure on the bottom right, you can see that used to be 70-30 between revenue and capital, now it's equal. So I think lately, for example, we have been reading news articles in the Financial Times, for example, that the United Kingdom is looking at treating some of its infrastructure or capex spending as not part of the fiscal spending calculation, which means it may not affect the deficit calculations. And apparently, OECD has given its blessing to the UK government to make that kind of distinction between borrowing for operating expenses of the government and borrowing for capital investment. If that kind of yardstick were applied to India, I think what you will see in the last 4 or 5 years, India's massive shift towards capital expenditure then will also not probably, should also not probably be reckoned in the fiscal deficit calculations, and that would paint a very different picture, a much healthier picture of India's fiscal situation, warranting even a credit rating upgrade. If this kind of a treatment were applied to India, what is being contemplated in the case of the UK, for example, as reported in the Financial Times. On the bottom left, of course, you see that India's inflation performance has been quite exemplary. Although food inflation has been on the higher side in the last 5 years compared to the previous 5 years, overall inflation in general in India has been well behaved compared to its own history. And that is one of the reasons why I think, interest rates in this cycle did not have to go beyond 6.5%. And the 10-year bond yield in India, the government bond yield, is also below 7%. And that also is helping cost of borrowing in general. People forget, compared to historical trends, the cost of borrowing in India is much lower, whether it is a housing loan or corporate loans, banking loans, etc. And I think and much credit for that has to go to both the monetary management and fiscal prudence, which has kept the inflation on a leash. So in fact, humans have a tendency not to be able to appreciate the counterfactual, and that is inherent to human nature. But if only the Indian government undertaken massive fiscal stimulus during COVID times, we would now be facing higher fiscal deficits, higher interest rates, and higher inflation. And India's macroeconomic story will not be as stellar, or probably even nowhere near as stellar as it is right now. This thrust on capital expenditure, which I spoke about earlier, is visible. You look at the national highway length, it has grown by a factor of 1.6 times, 1.6x between 2014 and 2024. What it means is that whatever we built between 1947, independence, and 2014, we added 60% of that in the last 10 years. The Vande Bharat number of Vande Bharat trains completely altering the travel experience for Indian middle class and upper middle class passengers. Railway electrification, addition to installed power generation capacity, which is not shown here in this chart. The turnaround time in Indian ports, some of you may have read journalist Swaminathan Iyer talking about it in his recent column yesterday or day before, how India's turnaround time in Indian ports are now even matching some of the East Asian ports. Of course, we have quite a bit of a distance to catch up with China, for example, but nonetheless, the improvement in India's situation compared to its own history has been remarkable. India built about 74 airports between independence and 2014, and that number was doubled in the last 8 years. And we have covered these in the economic survey last year and this year, last January in 2023, and also in July 2024, the economic survey. Thanks to GST, etc., the waiting time for trucks transporting goods has really come down by a factor of almost 8 in the last several years. So all of these things have boosted the supply side capability of the Indian economy, and that is also another factor. And I think we need to document this. The improvement in supply side capability of the Indian economy has also played a very big part in keeping inflation on a leash. As I said, we don't appreciate the counterfactual, and it's human nature to take what has been achieved for granted and look for more improvement, further improvement, because past always becomes dimmer and dimmer as time progresses and the memories fade. But and then people look forward to the next step and improvement, and in the process we fail to give adequate recognition to what's been achieved, whether it is Jan Dhan Yojana financial inclusion, whether it is Aadhaar, the direct benefit transfers during COVID times, the vaccination track record, and the physical infrastructure creation, and which is showing up in the improvement in port handling capacities, installed power generation capacity, particularly renewable energy. All these things are taken for granted, but I think all these things are going to serve us in good stead in the coming years in terms of being able to maintain a very steady growth rate of the Indian economy in the next several years. Nonetheless, as I mentioned earlier, given the global situation, which is going to be quite challenging, how does India grow? I think the answer is that India has to find domestic sources of growth, domestic catalysts for growth, and that is what I will talk about in the next 10 minutes or so. We have, in the economic survey that we brought out in July, after the new government was formed and before the budget, we have identified key challenges or path forward for India to sustain a growth rate of 6.5 to 7 or possibly even more in the coming years, notwithstanding the global challenges. So we have to generate productive employment. We have to address the skill gap to be able to generate the employment. That is, employability has to go up for employment to happen. Agricultural sector is still very important, and it has got potential to generate entrepreneurship and employment while providing food security for India and the world. Regulatory requirements for MSMEs, especially SMEs, small and micro enterprises, have to come down if they have to become an important job creating engine. And then along with all of these, we have to ensure that our energy mix slowly moves towards and gradually moves towards non-fossil fuels. And the important thing I did not mention earlier, but I think a challenge for India is that when China was making its own transition journey, development journey, from being a low-income country to a middle-income country today, from 1980s onwards, China did not have to worry about the China challenge, whereas India has to worry about the China challenge because of the massive strides that China has made in manufacturing, especially both low-tech and high-tech, etc., and the availability of skilled population. All these things have made China an important player in global manufacturing, and developed countries are finding it difficult to compete, and so is India. So how is India going to both tap into China's achievements and handle the China challenge? And this is a challenge that is faced by many countries in the world. We have to, deepen the corporate bond market is a slightly narrow focus. I think what we wanted to do is to make sure that the Indian financial sector is capable of supporting growth, supporting energy transition, and that requires both the bond market, the capital market, and the banking sector to fire as twin engines. We can't ride on just one engine, given India's size. Europe may have grown in the 1950s, 60s, and 70s purely on the back of strong banking system. The United States made the leap from banking system to capital markets. I think India, given its size, and none of these countries have India's size. And China, for example, has relied a lot on its own domestic banking because it is a very actively government-led economy. But India, given its large private sector and experience in banking and capital markets in the last 40 years, I think needs to nurture and grow both engines of financing, capital markets and the banking system. And that is how it will ensure efficient financial resource allocation to the most productive sectors. I'll first tap into agriculture. India has very fragmented land holdings, and I think we need to find ways to consolidate those lands. And I think the answer lies, of course, we're starting with land titlings, digitization, etc. But more importantly, state governments also have to facilitate land consolidation, because productivity cannot be improved unless the small holdings become viable, economically viable holdings, and that should be at least minimum 4 hectares, whereas the Indian average is only about 1 hectare. It used to be 2.8, it has come down to 1 hectare, and that could be one of the reasons why agricultural production growth also has slowed down in the post-green revolution era. So I think India needs one more agricultural revolution, and that has to start with the land consolidation. That will improve agricultural yield quite a bit. I think if we have to even reach the global average, we will be able to produce enough to feed Indians and also the world. And in today's context, being able to feed the world is an important geopolitical and geostrategic advantage as well. And I think if we are able to not just meet the global average, but even become the global best in class in maize, cotton, and rice and pulses, the amount of production that can go up will be huge. Of course, it will have implications for food inflation. So farmers will need some insurance, and also more importantly, farmers will need access to global markets. So I think we need to become much more predictable and transparent and consistent and stable with respect to our policies affecting farmers' incomes. We need to give them the freedom to sell to whomsoever, whatsoever prices, and also what the market demands. And we should find different mechanisms to be able to compensate urban and rural consumers of agricultural and food products, so that without upsetting the farmers' terms of trade. When it comes to manufacturing and small and medium enterprises, they are important, as I mentioned earlier, they're important engines of employment creation. That is how Japan, Germany, Switzerland, and continental Europe grew. I mean, even Italy and France, etc., Spain. So I think we need a small and medium enterprise sector. In the economic survey, we have talked about India having to create 8 million jobs for the next 10 to 12 years per annum. 80 lakhs. I think how that is going to happen? How can it can't be done only by large enterprises. Large enterprises, by and large, will rely more on capital and also and use a limited amount of labor. But SMEs will use more labor because their ability to raise capital is limited, their cost of capital is higher. But the labor that they have to hire will also have to be productive and skilled. Otherwise, they can't compete with capital-intensive firms. So, skilling is an important component of boosting employability and therefore boosting employment. The other thing is that, India has still, I think we have made a lot of progress, but India still has a large number of small enterprises, small and very few large enterprises and very few large companies. We still have too many nano and micro enterprises. And that is partly because the legacy of earlier policy framework, which was well-meaning, that it encouraged small industries by reserving production for them. But whenever we give concessions based on size thresholds, it creates a perverse incentive for enterprises to stay below that size threshold to be able to enjoy those concessions and advantages that the governments of the day provide, union or state governments. So, contrary to our expectations, the support systems, rather than encouraging or incentivizing or motivating small firms to grow larger, they feel that the larger they become, they will lose the concessions and they therefore stay below the size threshold so as to continue to be able to enjoy the various concessions available to them, interest subsidies, easier credit terms, maybe waiver of some compliance requirements, etc. So all these things, we have created too many small, micro, nano enterprises and too little large enterprises. So deregulation is an important way to boost their appetite for growth. And second element of boosting the number of small and medium enterprises from micro and nano is also the skill and management capabilities of the SME entrepreneurs, because they know their markets very well, they know their customers very well, but when it comes to financial management, human resource management, etc., small and medium entrepreneurs are relatively untrained or undertrained, and that can be a huge value unlock if targeted training can be given to them in these areas. So both have to go together. I think the emphasis on management capabilities training is equally important. They need successful mentors to guide them and counsel them on an ongoing basis. I give you some examples of the deregulation that needs to happen. I think the building land use regulations, the setbacks, the floor space, low floor space, parking requirements, etc., all reduce the amount of land available in the land scarce country, reduce the amount of land available for building a factory. And once the employment rises above a particular threshold, then what happens is that the law mandates so many other facilities, and the cost per employee cost of operations goes up significantly. I think these numbers need to be raised by orders of magnitude so that our small businesses can grow into medium size, 500,000, 2,000 workers. Some of these requirements may perhaps are better served by making them a requirement at much higher thresholds than what we have today, and ensuring at the same time certain minimum facilities that employees would need to have decent working conditions. But there is a trade-off between the two, and there's a good balance to be struck between the two. And right now we may be erring too much on one side, and that needs to be corrected. I mentioned about deregulation, and this is an example comparison with East Asia. Floor space ratio, car parking space mandate, which is much higher for a small country, but large country with a low per capita vehicle ownership. Our requirements for the amount of space to be set aside for car parking is much more than even what Singapore and Hong Kong mandate. And the implications are shown up in the cost of production for Indian businesses. And there are multiple other regulations that we have. Some of them may not be necessarily, enforced today. That's okay, but they still remain on the statute books. So they can, therefore, be dormant weapons to be used against businesses. So forever, I think the businesses remain wary of the inspection regime, even though many of these things may be redundant, may never be enforced, etc. But the fact that they remain in the law books is a source of concern and act as a dampener. So we need to focus on deregulation and training. And also I spoke about, so that is one way so if we deregulate properly and substantially, not only in the union government space, and more importantly, I think many of these regulations are in the domain of state governments. They implement them. They are the implementing agencies and they provide the inspection agencies. So while the laws and the rules and regulations may be written in the central act, the implementation machinery is in the hands of state government. So, and that is the way to enable these small and medium enterprises to grow bigger so that they can absorb more labor. But then that labor has to be equipped and skilled. And I think the good news is that I think India is now able to send more of its children into schools and colleges. People in the 15 to 29 year age bracket, I think if you look at rural India, only 2.4% went to college in 2000, but now 10.8% go to colleges. In 2000, only 17.9% of rural children went to completed the schooling. Now it is 42.9%. So I think there is plenty of improvement in the enrollments. That is no longer an Indian challenge. Now it's about learning outcomes. That is what we need to focus on. And that's a sign of progress because we are now putting behind us concerns about enrollment. We are now focusing on outcomes, learning outcomes in schools and colleges. So when a problem, quality of the problem or the nature of the problem changes, that is also a sign of progress. On the right side, what you see is, of course, the Enrollment ratio in colleges, 6.7% was the enrollment. In 2000, now it is 28.4%. And the ratio between women and men, which used to be 77 to 100, now it's 97 to 100. I think women are very, very quickly closing the gap with men in enrolling themselves in higher education. And it is happening again more so in rural India. So I think the payoffs to some of these improvements will show up in economic growth in the coming years. The employability of Indians has improved. I mean, it was 1/3 based on a test conducted by CII and VBox together. It's available on the internet. You can see it. The CII VBox employability test. Only 1/3 passed in 2014. Now it is 51.3%. But which means still nearly 1 in 2 are not employable. So we have made progress, but we also have much more milestones to cover. The journey is still, the road ahead is still long. The distance to be covered is still long and vast. And there are also restrictions on women in the workforce. I think while definitely to encourage more women to join the workforce, we need safety on the streets, safety in the workplace, stringent laws and consequences against harassment, etc. We also need deregulation because many of the areas are restricted for women to participate in, which is now somewhat anachronistic given the fact that women are able to do many activities that were deemed unsafe or unsuitable for them, but now they are excelling in every space, including in the battlefront and so on. So therefore, I think to hold women back by saying some of these occupations are not suitable for them is not particularly the right thing to do if you want to boost women labor force participation rate. As far as the artificial intelligence is concerned, I think it can be a positive, but we don't know yet. I think it's a long way to call it a positive force. But right now, in fact, we should be more concerned about the short-term consequences, which can be, AI can be, while on the one hand, enhancing productivity and boosting profitability, it also may end up displacing labor and eroding the labor share of income. So I think we should be very mindful of the short-term consequences. And I think here we should remember industrial revolutions eventually transformed today's developed countries, but while they were ongoing, the process of transition was particularly painful for the labor force. And now India again has a much bigger challenge given its size and given the fact that labor is India's strength. Therefore, there has to be a better balance between deployment of technology and deployment of labor. I think we need to be very cautious. And we need to also approach this issue of labor and technology balance with a huge amount of social responsibility. And some of it can also hurt the interest of businesses itself down the road, because the slower the growth in employment and labor income, the slower will be aggregate demand, and businesses will not be able to sell what they produce. And global markets are also challenging. So in some sense, while deployment of technology and substituting labor with capital or technology might be profitable in the short run, in the medium run, it can be a self-destructive pursuit. So I think we need to be very mindful of what we are doing here when we also follow the trend and the fashion of the day in deploying technology everywhere. We have to strike a better balance, not only for social stability and economic stability, but also in our own enlightened self-interest for the medium term. The China challenge is important. China has continued to grow its exports. In fact, its exports have never been higher than they are now. US sanctions, US restrictions have also diverted China exports to other countries. So the export engine of China is humming, which means it affects the domestic manufacturing plants of many countries. India is no exception. And therefore, how do we compete in a world where China remains the manufacturing colossus? Particularly for India, I think the import of capital goods is very high in its various imports from China. So that is why the trade balance in India, between India and China, which is about $90 billion in favor of China. I think, and the bulk of it is coming from capital goods, which means India's downstream production is dependent on imports of equipment and machinery from China. So I think that is why I think the economic survey opened up the discussion on the question of how do we balance dependence on trade and dependence on, and probably inviting capital from China. It is not that there are no challenges on either side. I think there are formidable challenges on both sides, but I think it's important to figure out how to reduce the dependence and vulnerability, at the same time generate domestic capability and know-how and strength, at least for the medium term. And that is that is the ultimate challenge that India has to figure out. Climate change is a global phenomena, and I think temperatures are rising, and they are by and large anthropogenic. But the transition has to be done with care, because public policy is about recognizing that there are trade-offs everywhere. So, for example, when we talk about dependence on Gulf countries for oil, crude oil imports, we also should recognize that the energy transition will depend on many minerals and metals and rare earths, which are either produced or processed in China substantially. So, de-risking of energy sources may end up creating new sources of risk. Therefore, the pace and the intensity of energy transition has to be calibrated, has to be careful, and not only energy security, but overall national security has to be kept in mind when we undertake energy transition. It cannot be, therefore, climate change or climatism cannot be a religion. It has to be pursued with a lot of awareness of trade-offs and consequences and unintended consequences, etc. Because when I say there are consequences of the pace with which we pursue energy transition, we should remember that Indian government relies, the governments in the country, union and state, rely on the sale of petrol and diesel for a lot of tax revenue, 7.5 trillion rupees, 7.5 lakh crores. On the left side, you can see that the Indian Railways earns 50% of the revenue from carrying coal. So the sooner we get rid of these fossil fuels, then we will lose the opportunity to earn these revenues, and the fiscal balances will be affected. And banks which have lent to thermal power plants will also have to take a hit on their assets, etc. So there are multiple consequences, and the workers who are working in coal mines and power plants, etc., will have to be relocated and retrained, and many of them may not be possible to train them. They may not be able to relocate. These are all social. There are social dimensions to it. And therefore, I think energy transition has to be pursued with a lot of care and a lot of consideration for side effects, collateral damage, and all encompassing costs. Because many a time in the literature and global discourse, we hear about the cost of inaction, but there is a considerable cost to action as well on climate change and energy transition. We need to be mindful of the two, and we have to, as the Chinese saying goes, you have to cross the river by feeling the stones. And I think India has also much to offer, because when it comes to climate change, we should not merely be agenda takers from the developed world when they tell us to worry about carbon dioxide or greenhouse gas emission, because our way of living and our way of using land to feed animals is much better, because we don't use food versus feed balance in India is much better. Because, for example, it takes 100 times as much land to produce 1,000 kilocalories of meat compared to plant-based alternatives. And that is what the West is doing. And, land is a very scarce commodity for India. In G20, we have the highest per capita density of population. And renewable energy requires a lot of land. So, therefore, land has to be explicitly costed. When we consider the price of per kilowatt hour energy generated by renewable energy versus conventional energy generation, I think the cost of land has to be factored. And most of the cereals grown in the West end up going to animals, and then they in turn end up consuming the animal as a food. So there is a double consumption of energy here. So, when we talk of renewable energies and energy transition, alternate sources of energy, in this discourse, there is a certain indifference or neglect of energy demand itself. And some of the ways of living in Western advanced societies are a cause of higher energy requirement, and they are energy inefficient. And then now on top of all this, we also have the artificial intelligence and crypto mining and data centers requiring huge amounts of energy. So I think there is a little bit of inconsistency and double standards in what they are telling us to do and what they are doing themselves by generating completely extremely onerous requirements on new energy, and then trying to make the transition to renewable energy in this within a single generation, which has never happened. At the same time, doing very little to curb energy consumption demand. In fact, if anything, contributing or worsening or compounding the energy demand problem as well simultaneously through AI data centers and mining, crypto mining, etc. I think that is a complete need to rethink the entire approach to energy transition, and India can be the leader in setting the narrative and the agenda and how this has to be pursued, mindful of the various inconsistencies and unintended consequences in the current approach to energy transition and dealing with climate change. So summarizing all of this, I think, as I mentioned earlier, I think while we have challenges, which is not a surprise, we are still a young, low-income country, and we have a large population. Therefore, there will be challenges. There will be much more milestones to cross before we become an advanced economy. But I think we should not underestimate the progress made. That is why I spent some time talking about the supply side improvements, the way we handled the COVID, and then the way we have created infrastructure and also helped improve the efficiency of the Indian economy. I think that is why the growth rate is now somewhere between 6.5% and 7% on a steady state basis. Some agencies, in fact, forecast a much higher growth rate for India. We, in the economic survey, have taken a slightly more cautious line because of global factors, and because when we wrote the economic survey, the monsoon was still at the early stage. So I think we will achieve a good growth rate, closer to 7%, between 6.5% and 7%, and on a steady state basis, on the back of all the good things we have done in the last 10 years or so, financial inclusion, direct benefits transfers, GST, insolvency and bankruptcy code, public digital infrastructure, and physical infrastructure creation, etc., and the ease of doing business. In all these, we have a long way to go, but what we have done already will enable us to grow at the minimum as a baseline case, at least 6.5% in real terms, 11% in nominal terms per annum. So I think that is a very good achievement in the current global context. And if on top of that, if we can address some of these things which we discussed in the last half an hour, agriculture, small and medium enterprises, deregulation, boosting the management capability, and managing our energy transition in a cautious and calibrated manner, deregulate the economy, skilling our workforce, etc., then I think our potential to grow will go up to 7.5% to 8% rather than 6.5% to 7%. I think the promise is very good. The path ahead is very bright. There are challenges. We should basically be open both to India's potential and promise while being mindful of how challenging and difficult and complex the task is. So I think the path to progress starts with the recognition and realization of the complexity of the world we live in and the pervasive uncertainties. If we therefore take our steps forward carefully while being mindful of all of this without getting carried away, at the same time staying confident and being able to maintain this right balance, I think the future is very bright and secure for India. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Nageswaran. It's a very enlightening speech. You have touched upon probably whatever is needed, that the domestic sector will be very important for future growth, and we have to be very careful about how the land problem can be solved, how the MSME, they can be given some kind of a boost, especially balancing between technology and
job creation, the need for deregulation. You pointed out very clearly that deregulation has to be in almost all kinds of factor markets. You mentioned many of them. And then it's kind of inclusive growth, which you talked about, be it gender, like women, more participation, and then how the employment creation, job creation can help, especially in the light of skilling, more education, so that more and more those who are left out can be brought into the picture. And then obviously the China challenge. China didn't face a challenge, but India faces a China challenge. I appreciate that kind of philosophy. And so overall, it's a very compact picture which you have drawn. We learned a lot. Do you have time for some questions? Very few, maybe 5
Yeah, I
minutes.
think we have just 1 second. Let me just check my calendar and see how much of time I have. So we have today is yeah, I can be around for the next 8 to 10 minutes. We are 22 minutes past 12 on
Yeah.
my clock. I can be online for another 8 to 10 minutes. Thank you.
Yes, we'll try to limit it to 5 minutes. So, if you have very focused and pointed questions, you can ask Dr. Nageswaran. Yes. Microphone, please. Just self-introduce so that Dr. Nageswaran knows who is asking the question.
Yeah, I am Shubhit Chakraborty. I am a former president of this chamber and the ex-MD and CEO of Exide. I have a very focused question for you. In your deliberations, you have not talked about the income inequality challenge. And how do you propose to address that? Thank you.
No, thank you for the question. I think I spent a lot of time on the balance between technology and labor, and that was a direct issue. That was directly linked to inequality, because if you look at the last 3-4 years, corporate profitability growth has been extremely good, but labor employment growth and labor compensation growth have been relatively more muted. They have done well, but not as well, nowhere near as well as corporate profitability. And that is why I spend a lot of time talking about the importance of finding the right balance between technology deployment, capital deployment, and labor deployment. So technology has to be labor augmenting rather than labor displacing. And more importantly, when it comes to addressing inequality, recently research relating to China, as surveys taken of Chinese population, asked them the questions about how they perceived inequality. I think they basically, similar to what happened in the US, Chinese citizens, the Chinese households, which responded to the survey, said that they had no problems with, rich people or wealth in general. But what they want to see, of course, is that there is a fairness in the system and that everybody has a fair shot at becoming richer. So if you measure inequality on a static basis, for example, let's say today if I have 100 rupees and someone else has zero, and therefore inequality is very high, and tomorrow the position flips, he or she has 100 rupees and I have zero, the static measure of inequality will still be the same. But there has been a churn. My 100 rupees is now in somebody else's hands and vice versa. What you want is the mobility, is the progress. So static measures of inequality do not take that into consideration. We need to make sure that there is progress and mobility and that everybody has a fair shot at becoming wealthier. And for example, in the last, if you look at the data in the last 3-4 years, the amount of equity holdings in India, stock market holdings, even at income levels below 5 lakhs, has grown substantially, and which is not the case in the developed world. In fact, bulk of the equity ownership, stock market ownership, even in the United States, is concentrated in the higher income categories, whereas in India, it's much more equally distributed, much more comparatively. And that's a good thing. So I think, while we understand that inequality is jarring and beyond a point, it is a threat to social stability. We need to be clear that what is more important is fairness, rather than inequality, because at the common person's level, they appreciate that there are reasons for some differential to exist, but they need to make sure that it is fairly earned. And second, opportunities have to be there for mobility to happen and for the churn to happen. And I think in that case, inequality can be managed and even harnessed to better everyone's prospects. Thank you.
Well, we can just have maybe one more question.
Hello.
Yes, Mr. Jalan, and then.
Good afternoon, sir. My name is Vivek Jalan. I am the chairperson of the Fiscal Affairs and Taxation Committee in Bengal Chamber. You spoke about deregulation. Would it also include more simplification and equity in laws with special focus on tax laws?
When I speak about deregulation, I think, and also simplification, it includes simplification. It includes all statutes, all acts and legislation, whether it is tax or non-tax.
Okay.
And the government indeed has announced it in the budget. I mean, the Honorable Finance Minister did announce the simplification of direct taxes, and then GST code is being examined. And the Jan Vishwas 2.0 will be launched, etc. So the government is, in fact, the budget of 24-25, which was passed by the Parliament in July this year, I think actually takes cognizance of many of these issues and have taken very important and significant steps in the direction of these issues and priorities that I outlined in my presentation. And tax law simplification, it was mentioned in the budget speech as well, and I think the work also has commenced in the ministry in delivering on that promise made in the budget. Thank you.
Okay, the last question, Dr. Nageshwaran. One more, yes, if you can just introduce yourself.
Dr. Nageshwaran, this is B.B. Chatterjee. I'm a past president of the chamber. The challenge of cooperation between the center and the states to make all this happen. Any thoughts on that, please?
I think that's a good question. I think states have a natural incentive to undertake many of these things, given that states compete with each other for investments and for talent as well. So, and I think, there are mechanisms wherein states interact with the center through, at the level of bureaucracies, at the level of political executive as well, because the Niti Aayog Governing Council has all the chief ministers as ex officio members. And the GST Council provides a forum for all finance ministers to meet as well. So I think, while definitely, I think the center-state cooperation mechanisms do exist, and that does happen. I think sometimes we may be somewhat misled by headline stories of political differences, which they exist. But I think underneath, there is a degree of cooperation and coordination that does happen, both at the level of the bureaucracy and the political executive. And if it intensifies, then of course the room for achieving many of these things, which now actually are more in the realm of states, whether it is education sector, labor market reforms, deregulation for SMEs, etc., agriculture, all of these things actually have to happen at the level of state governments, while tax laws, etc., direct taxes, especially because indirect tax is now governed by the GST Council, where states have a big role to play. So, in that sense, I think there is cooperation that happens.
Thank you. In fact, we don't have more time for questions. Dr. Nageshwaran, it's a very comprehensive and very stimulating speech. We will really be very happy to host you in person soon. And I hope you will have time to come and enlighten us in near future.
I look forward to that as well myself. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir.